Good afternoon and welcome to another inReach Field Experience webinar, inReach Best Practices. My name is Chip Noble. I'm a product manager here at Garmin. And as you can see from this picture of my hike with my daughter, I am a responsible outdoorsman. That's particularly relevant for today's topic because we're going to talk about all of the things that an inReach user should do when they want to get ready to go out for an adventure with their family, possibly with young ones that you want to take care of on the trail, and to make sure that you have a good experience and you're also prepared should an emergency take place. So as I mentioned, today's topic is inReach best practices. So we're going to talk about what to do before you go out on your trip. This is really the planning and preparation part of getting ready. We're going to talk about what to do when you're actually on the trip, some tips that we'd like to share and things for folks when they are first heading out onto the trail. And then when you're out on your hike, if you run into an emergency, there are some things we want to share with you that will help really to make sure that you get the most out of the device during that situation. And then after your trip, there are some tips for best practices on how to end your hike and let friends and family know that you're back safe to kind of wrap things up. So that's our plan for today's webinar. So the most important thing in preparing for a trip is to make sure that your account is active and that everything is, set up correctly. You have the correct contact information. So we're going to talk through that. So you want to confirm that your account is set up correctly, and that really amounts to making sure your subscription is active. And a little note here, because the inReach is a satellite communication device, it requires an active subscription. You want to review your contact information because should you have an emergency, you are going to declare an SOS, and then that message is going to be received by GEOS Search and Rescue, and they're going to reach out to your emergency contacts. They'll first reach out to you as the user, so make sure that your information is accurate. They'll reply to you with an inReach message. They'll also reach out to your emergency contacts. That for myself, that's my mom, that's my wife. Those are the people that might have additional details about where I'm going, what my agenda was for the trip. If they don't have additional information, it's still important for GEOS to let them know that there is an emergency. They would be their contact to share details as they work through the situation with first responders. And the last piece here is to make sure that you update your emergency notes. And those emergency notes are places where you can put in additional details. It could be information about your destination. It could be special requests for how GEOS should handle an SOS should it occur. It could be medical information. Perhaps you have, bee sting allergy or a particular blood type that requires special care. So these are all important things for you to make sure are part of your account. And I also want to mention here as we're going through these slides, we're covering a lot of this information at a high level. There's a lot of extra information. If you're interested, you can go to the support site, support.garmin.com, and see the previous webinars that we've done on these different topics. I know in particular, we did a detailed discussion of the SOS feature and how the interaction with GEOS Search and Rescue goes. After setting up your contact information, really the details about how GEOS will reach out to your emergency contacts, there are some additional steps that we would recommend that would enhance your experience. They're not necessarily required for you to complete for your trip, but they definitely would make your experience more enjoyable. The first one that we want to talk about is your preset and quick text messages. And the preset, as we've talked about in the past, is a message that you write ahead of time. You create it on the Explore website, and you specify who's going to receive that message. So I use, and I think most of our customers use, and I'm checking in, everything's okay message. And you send that to the friends and family who are going to most closely follow along and be curious about what your activity is. You have 3 presets that you can create. You sync those to the app, you sync them to the website, to the device, and then you can use those when you're in the field. All of our data plans include unlimited preset messages, send as many as you want. The other type of message is called a quick text message. And the nice thing about a quick text message is you write them ahead of time so that you can use them quickly. It's right there in the title. I use a quick text message that says, thanks for your message. I'm in the middle of an activity, I'll respond to you as soon as I have a chance. And that's nice because it means if I receive the message and I'm in the middle of a steep climb or some part of my trip that I don't want to stop, I can fire off that quick message, and then whoever messaged me doesn't have to worry that something's happened. And then the next step is to review your personal contacts. This is important because you're going to sync this information down onto your inReach device, and you want to have that contact information available when you get into the field. So if I wanted to send a message to a friend, I don't have to have their phone number memorized or their email. I can just pick it from my contact list, send the message, they receive it, they can reply to me. Check the box there. This next piece is very useful, especially as we talk about this, the conscientious hiker, the person who's thinking about having the best experience and also making sure that they're prepared should an emergency occur. One of the things that you hear a lot in the outdoor space is plan the hike and hike the plan. And part of that really is around specifying where is it that you're going and then sharing that with someone. So with the Explore website and the app and the inReach system, you can specify the waypoints for where you're going and the route for how you plan to get there. So you see here a hike in Mount Washington where the waypoint for the start and the summit have been identified in the route for how we'll travel along this path. It's drawn ahead of time, and that can be synced not only down to the device for you to use in the field, but it can also be synced to MapShare. And that allows people who are following along, they know what your plan is. And then as long as you stay on that plan and your breadcrumb trail shows up on that MapShare page, people have a better sense of what your activity is, and they'll have a better way of knowing when you should be finished with your activity. So having done that planning step, the next piece is to make sure that you enable MapShare. And this is really after you've created the plan, this is how you share your plan with other people. So I can turn on my MapShare page. That's a website that shows the map. It shows my GPS breadcrumb trail. It shows any messages that I send to MapShare. And I can send that to friends and family. And it does a few things. Lets them see what your activity is, as I just described. It also lets them initiate a conversation with you. They can send you a message. You receive that message, you can reply. And so we check the box there. Make sure you send your MapShare link to people before you head out into the field. Should you forget, you can send it from the field, but it's just a nice thing to get out there for people. The next step that's important is to make sure that you install a companion app that you can take with you. So if you have, as you can see, there's the EarthMate app and the Explore app, and these are both available on Apple and Android. And the difference between the two apps is that the EarthMate app is designed for the inReach SE Explorer, the SE Plus Explorer Plus, the inReach Mini. And then the Explore app is designed, excuse me, for the GPS Map 66i. So you want to install the app onto your phone, and then you want to pair that app with your device. If you go to the Explore app or the EarthMate app, you can find a page for pairing your device, and it has detailed instructions that will walk you through the process. You can also go to the setup and Bluetooth section on your inReach device itself, and there's some instructions there. And you just want to follow those instructions. It amounts to putting both devices into a listening mode, and they talk to each other, and you can confirm the pairing. And once that pairing is successful, you want to check to make sure that the content that you created on the website or created in the app, either place, that's synced down onto your device correctly. And so you can see, these are two examples here. One is that hike in Mount Washington. The other one is a bike ride, the Trek Across Maine bike ride. And you should be able to see it on the website, in the app, and on the device. It's a great way to have that content available with you, no matter how you want to review it. Then from there, one of the last important steps is to make sure that you download the maps for the area where you plan to go. So there's a map layer option in both apps, and you can also go to the waypoint list or the route list for the data you just created. And if you view the details for those objects, you can download a map that way as well that will cover exactly where you plan to go. But the key is you can get topographic maps, you can get aerial imagery, you can get USGS quad sheets here in the US. And those are great tools to have with you when you're out on your hike. So we'll check the box there. And there's an important note here. I mentioned it already as well, but the GPS Map 66i, that newer device, is only compatible with the Explorer app. So we've talked about how to set up the account. We've talked about how to do all of your work with the Explorer website, planning and getting everything ready. We talked about how to get the app installed. The next section we want to talk about is really setting up that inReach device. And this is an important piece because we're going to do a couple of tests here that really help us make sure that our device is ready for use in the field. The first step, though, is very important. Make sure that you've charged the device. Make sure that you sync the inReach device with the website. There are a bunch of really valuable things that happen when you sync your device with the website. The most important one is it checks for firmware updates. So if we've made any improvements to the system, if we've released any new features, just in general, any piece of electronics that you have, it's good practice before a big trip to connect it to the computer and check for an update to the firmware. It will also sync all of your user data to the device and from your device up to the Explorer site. That's those waypoints and routes that we created in the previous steps. There are a couple of ways to sync. One is to use if you have an inReach SE, Explorer, SE Plus, Explorer Plus, or the Mini, you can use the Sync app that's part of the Explorer website, and you see that in the top screenshot. And that Sync app will do the firmware update and sync the data back and forth. And those devices will also connect to the EarthMate app, which would allow you to sync without using that cable. It can't do a firmware update, so you still would need the Sync app. And then you see the note, the reference to the Explorer app. That's for the GPS Map 66i. That's how the only way actually that you can sync data to the 66i is through that Bluetooth connection. If I want to do a firmware update for the 66i and the inReach Mini, I can connect those to Garmin Express, and that is a utility that will check for firmware updates for those devices. After charging and syncing and making sure that everything is updated, the next thing that I like to do is run a test just to make sure that my messaging is able to do a round trip message. I can send from the device, the satellites hear that message, they check in with the server, and they send a reply back with a green check mark that says everything's okay. I like to think of that test as something to run right from the porch in the backyard before I head out. That way, if it doesn't work for some reason, I can do some troubleshooting. I don't want to find out by running my test at the trailhead. It might be a little too late for me to do a firmware update or check my subscription plan on the website. So do that test. It's very quick. Run that test at your house before you leave. The next thing that we want to talk about is reviewing some basic inReach device features. And most people will probably remember the important features that they use on a regular basis, but it doesn't hurt. I often ask people who are either new to inReach or haven't used it for a while to do a test in their yard or in their neighborhood. Take the device the next time you go to walk the dog and just run some of these features to familiarize yourself, remind yourself, so that you're not trying to do a refresher at the trailhead while your friends are trying to say, hurry up. So to review the things that we think are really important for folks, requesting a weather forecast, make sure you review how to send a basic or premium weather forecast, whether you're getting information about a land trip or perhaps you're going out on the boat and you want a marine forecast. Very powerful feature. You want to make sure that you know how to start and stop tracking. Very straightforward on the inReach devices. You can start and stop tracking on the tracking page. For the 66i, the slightly different term, but it's the live track page. Go to live tracking and start and stop, and that sends your location by default every 10 minutes to the website, which then posts it onto your MapShare page so people can see what your breadcrumb trail looks like as you go on your hike. We also want to review how to trigger an SOS. It is straightforward. You you open the SOS door and press and hold that SOS button until you see the SOS countdown timer. That opens up the messaging conversation with GEOS Search and Rescue. They'll acknowledge that they've received your message and then ask for the nature of the emergency. Is it a equipment failure or a medical emergency, that sort of thing. The navigation capabilities of the device are very useful. There is navigation built into each of our inReach devices and at different levels. That allows you to navigate along a route that you created in the planning stage. You can navigate to a waypoint that you've created. Some of the devices have topographic maps. They all have a compass, like you see here in the screenshot. Really makes it a nice feature because, again, back to this preparation and planning and best practices, when you get out of your truck, create the waypoint that shows where your location at the start of your trip is. Worst case, you can do a track back with these devices and find your way back to the vehicle if you get turned around. So familiarizing yourself with the routing and waypoint capabilities of the device is very good practice. The last one is, and probably the most important for the system, make sure that you're familiar with how to compose and send a message. It's straightforward. You go to the messaging page, you create a new message. I would encourage people to learn the shortcuts, the keyboard shortcuts that allow you to type quickly. It takes a buttoned interface device that can be slow. It's not as fast as a touchscreen, but if you don't have that touchscreen available and you've spent some time practicing sending messages using those shortcuts, you can communicate relatively quickly. And certainly if you have to send any messages to search and rescue, it's good to know how to use the keyboard. So we'll check that for our last step on what to do before we go out on our trip. So we've covered the planning, we've covered the testing of the device before you get away from the house. We've reviewed some of the features that are important to know how to use. Now, when you find yourself actually at the trailhead, this is really, for me, the most important part of our webinar. This is the part that can really have a big impact on how your trip goes. And it actually does start with this simple bullet. Make sure that you turn your inReach device on. It gives it a chance to get a GPS fix. So we want to check that box. And when the device turns on, it looks to the GPS satellites to get a 3D fix to triangulate your location on the surface of the earth wherever you are. There are different types of fixes or searches that happen. And so if the device hasn't been used in a long time, or if the last time it was used was in a location that's a long way away from where you are now, it can take longer to do what's called a cold start. It has to download the satellite constellation information. It has to download details about where to even look for the satellites. And that can take a couple of minutes. So we want you to do that when everything's going smooth and you're at the vehicle and you haven't even started your hike yet. For folks that don't do this step and then you run into an emergency, it's an added level of stress while you wait for your device to get a GPS fix. Turn the device on, make sure it has a clear view of the sky. It is a line of sight process. Make sure that you look to see the GPS signal strength bars on the 66i. You see that in the picture here. You want to have 4 bars that shows you a nice strong GPS signal. You want to make sure that if you have the SE Plus, the Explorer Plus, the Mini, look to see that the location arrow has gone from an outline to a solid fill. There are also pages you can go to the map page and see if your map has updated to show your current location. You could go to the compass page to make sure that you see a latitude, longitude reported, but just make sure you see that GPS signal. And then if you want to turn the device off to save battery because you're going out for a multi-day hike or multi-week even trip, that's okay. At least the device checked in, it knows where you are, where your location is, and it will be that much faster to get a GPS fix if you turn it on further down the trail. So we want to check that box. And then there's some additional things that we wanted to call out here that will help, again, at the trailhead. So the most important is to turn it on, get the GPS fix. But from there, you can also choose to turn on tracking. And I did mention that tracking it's not included in the safety plan, but it is included in unlimited in the recreation plan. So that might be something to consider if you're doing a lot of hiking. Having that recreation plan means that you can turn the device on and start tracking and every 10 minutes your location gets sent to your MapShare site. It's also available for GEOS so that they can see how you got to a particular location when you declare your SOS, or should you need to. So useful to have tracking, as I mentioned, not required. Just make sure that you turn the device on so that it can check in with the satellites, find your location, and have that available should there be an emergency. So turn on tracking. And then from there, another thing that's very useful is to send that first message to friends and family. This is part of that plan the hike, hike the plan thing. You let people know that you're going on a trip. You share your MapShare with them so that they can see your plan. So sending that message is important. I like it because it makes it interactive for my friends and family. In a way, it brings them along with me to enjoy the adventure. And so I've got a little ahead of myself, but talking about sharing that MapShare link, that is what ties them in. So they can see the map, they can see my breadcrumb trail, they can send me a message. If I chose not to turn on tracking, but I still have my device on, they could even ping my device or do a location request to see where I am. So share your MapShare link. So from there, set up, planning, testing, what to do with the trailhead. Now, while you're out on the trip, you're actually out on the trail now. There's some things we want to make sure people are aware of. The first one is how you position the device determines how well it can see the sky. So GPS, we know, is line of sight. The Iridium satellites are also line of sight. So we want to make sure that that antenna that you see there has a nice clear view of the sky. And this starts by where you put it on your backpack. You want to put it up high in your body. You want to put it on the strap of your backpack or in the pocket on your backpack so that the device is oriented with the antenna up facing the sky. You want to make sure that the device is accessible so that you can reach it should you have an emergency. When I hike, I carry it here where this picture shows on the shoulder strap of a backpack. I also sometimes carry it clipped to the back of my backpack so it's more out of the way. So my phone can also be paired with my device. So if I want to take my phone out of my pocket, I can declare an SOS. And should the device, if I have a fall and I declare SOS and don't realize that I'm laying with my backpack on top of the inReach device, after an appropriate amount of time, it will come back and report and say, your message hasn't gone out. And then you have to start thinking about, okay, what's the position of my inReach device? Does it have a clear view of the sky? So double check some of those things. But in general, making sure the device is accessible for SOS is important. And then tethering the device. The last thing we want is for your inReach device to get brushed off your pack by a branch and you not realize that you don't have it with you. And you don't drop it in the river while you're fly fishing and watch it tumble downstream. So tether it to your person in some way so you can keep track of it. So we check the box there. And I've been talking on this whole slide really about the importance of keeping the device positioned with a clear view of the sky. That antenna at the top is a helical antenna. The signal that comes out of that, you think of it as an umbrella or a mushroom. The signal is strongest radiating out from the top of the device. And no signal comes out of the bottom. So you can imagine if you put the device in your pack and it got jostled and accidentally turned upside down, it would be the hardest for a message to get out. So you don't want to have any obstruction. You want to keep the device high on your person with a clear view of the sky and keep that antenna pointed out. Should the message fail to go out, you see here in this note that messages are queued and will continue to try and send. That's a nice benefit over some of the other devices out there that only send the message a certain number of times and then stop. With our inReach two-way satellite communication, we have message delivery confirmation. So we know that the message made it. That's a great peace of mind, certainly when you're sending an SOS message. And when that queuing happens, we release those messages in a priority order. So SOS is always the highest priority, even if you had 3 or 4 casual messages already written and in the queue. If you declare SOS, it jumps to the top of the list and it's the first thing the device will focus on. After that, it's messages, and then track points will be sent. If you're ever out on a trip and you feel as though messages, you haven't heard from someone in a while and you're curious, you can go to the mailbox check page. When you choose the mail check option, it will tell you that it's checking for messages and will tell you the last time that it's successfully checked. And if there were messages waiting for you, they'll be downloaded at that time. So we check the box on how to carry your inReach device when you're out on the trip. The next section is an important one. This is what to do during an SOS and really best practices. As we mentioned, there are webinars that go into a deep dive on everything that happens during an SOS. But the key items here we really wanted to touch on. The most important first one, make sure that you keep the device elevated up off the ground, not in your pants pocket, certainly not on the bottom of the canoe. You want to hold it up where it has a clear view of the sky. You can even watch the sending icon on the message, and when it goes out, you'll hear a little trill to let you know that the message went. So with the antenna pointed up, clear view of the sky. So once GEOS receives the SOS, they will communicate with you with messaging. The SOS page has that conversation with GEOS. They send to the person in the emergency a message right away that says, we see that you've had an emergency. What's the nature? Is it medical or equipment failure? And people should respond to that. It does a couple of things. It lets them know kind of the state of the person. They can say, okay, they're able to type their reply. And then you can provide additional details that helps when GEOS tells the local area search and rescue what they should bring with them. That's an important step. We want to make sure everyone realizes, certainly if you're unable to reply to that message, it doesn't change what GEOS will do. They certainly will still move forward, as you see here, and initiate the rescue. But it does give them additional details, which is always helpful in this kind of situation. So another note in that kind of general best practices for anyone going out into the backcountry, if you have just declared that SOS and your location has gone out, it's important for you to stay in that location unless GS tells you that you need to move to a new spot. But that's where they're going to dispatch search and rescue. And when they get there, they want to know that you haven't moved on to some other location. So if possible, stay at the location where you triggered your SOS. And then the last note here is that when you start that SOS, the tracking does turn on. It sends your location every 60 seconds for the first 10 minutes, and then it falls back to a 10-minute tracking interval. And that's really just to make sure that your location is updated as frequently as possible for search and rescue. So that was everything that we would like people to know about best practices for SOS. Now, after your trip is completed, there are some additional things that folks should do around letting people know that your event is over. One here right at the beginning, important, is if you had been messaging with friends and family, it's courteous, a nice thing to send them a message and let them know that you've finished. I have a couple of interesting stories from following friends who went out on a hike, but when they finished the hike, they didn't send me a message to let me know that they had finished, and they also did not acknowledge the fact that they had unsent messages. So they came down off a particularly steep, tough climb and were pretty wiped out after and wanted to just jump in the truck and go get a pizza. And I had been following along. When they finished, they went to power their device off, and it said, hey, you have unsent items, and they said, that's okay, and they shut down anyway. They didn't come out of the woods when I had expected them, so I was looking at their MapShare page, and because they canceled the last 2 or 3 track points that had been queued, to me it looked like they were still half an hour to an hour up the trailhead trying to work their way out. So just double check if you have people you know are following along, you've been messaging, send them a message to say you're finished, and if your device says there's still data waiting to be sent, you can choose to wait and let that message go out. A little note about the 66i, because that device does use a recording tool, you could save your activity recording. You could save your activity and give it a special name like Mount Washington Hike, something like that. And then the last note here is about syncing your inReach device when you're done. So because everything is connected, your inReach device can sync with your Explorer app or your EarthMate app, and then that app can sync with the website. And that's an important, useful tool because it makes sure that any data you collected while you were out in the field gets backed up for you into the cloud. When you finish with your trip, do some things to let folks know you're done, and check that box that you've synced everything, and the last piece here, when you get home, then you can go in and review that trip, and you can see the details of your track line, where you actually went, any messages you sent, any extra waypoints you might have recorded. So review your trip information when you're finished. So that covers really the best practices content that we wanted to share. If you're looking for additional information about inReach, as we say at the end of each of our webinars, there is the great resource in the Garmin Explore site, explore.garmin.com. That's where you can learn all about your plans and your account management. There's also the support site, support.garmin.com. The team at Garmin does a great job with help documents, their manuals, these product videos, and these webinars that we work on here. Those are all available through the support site. And then there's also the Garmin blog, which is really exciting place to go and read about the latest in inReach adventures. You can read even some great SOS stories that talk about people who have had successes with their inReach device, helping them out in some challenging situations. So we appreciate all of you tuning in for this webinar, and hopefully we've shared some useful best practices, and we look forward to all of you joining us for our next webinar. Thank you.